Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Rich, David, how are you gentlemen doing this afternoon?
Wonderful.
You're terrific. How are you?
Doing great. I appreciate you guys joining me here for the podcast. Rich and I started having some conversation on LinkedIn. I had read the article that you both contributed to on law.com about the soft AI and the talent war and software development and build versus buy. And that's a conversation we have, it seems like, on a weekly basis with customers. So I thought it would be great to get you both on here and hear a little bit about your perspectives, which should be interesting. But before we do that, why don't we do some quick introductions? Rich, I know you've been on the vendor side, now you're on the law firm side, and tell us a little bit about what you've done in the past and what you're doing today.
Sure. So yeah, I've been all over the place. I was a partner at Sidley, where I practiced corporate law, public company stuff for about 15 years. I was a general counsel at Morningstar, the investment information firm. Deep background in technology, doing AI back in the 80s, and then returned to Sidley to build its knowledge management department. Been focusing on data and innovative technologies applied to the practice of law for a long time. Super interested in data science, natural language processing. Did some consulting in that space, with firemen, and worked at Epic, the large ALSP, heading up their AI work, and find myself with Dave at Reed Smith, kind of driving our AI work inside the innovation team.
Did you say AI? You were doing AI in the 80s?
Yeah.
That's we're gonna have to dive into that. I want to learn more about what sort of AI stuff was going on in the 80s.
Absolutely. Hey, we go back to the 50s if you want, but
Now
Wow.
you got them started, right?
Yeah, you're really going back. Dave, I know you're former CIO at Winston & Strawn. You're, I think, Chief Innovation Officer at Reed Smith.
Right.
What else about your background is interesting?
Well, that already takes you a ways back. But before that, I was a consultant to the legal industry for a long time. So I really enjoyed, because I got to spend time with 200 different law firms around the world and really getting behind the scenes and understanding what is it that they're trying to accomplish, how good are they at using technology, processes, data, and like Rich did that for a long time. So I got to see the evolution of law firms and a lot of disappointment too, because we would go into award-winning law firms regularly and find that that there's not a lot of depth to areas. And so I enjoyed that. My job was always to sit back strategically and say, how would we approach this? How do we execute the change and bring things forward? And so as you said, I was at Winston Strawn for 9 years and then here for 3 at Reed Smith. And so I've always been balance of operations and innovation and strategy, trying to say, how do we solve the business problem? And technology is one of those levers. So it's a little more about business transformation.
Interesting. And Rich, what is your current title at Reed Smith?
I'm a director of applied AI.
Gotcha. I just did a post this week I went back, and we've been ILTA sponsors for a long time. And I'm a data hoarder. So I went back and looked at the ILTA roster from 10 years ago and asked the question, how many ILTA members had the word innovation in their title in 2014? And there were 16 folks at 10 law firms. And then I asked the same question today, and there's 300 across 135 law firms.
Wow.
And what I'm thinking is that the same is going to be true with AI, right? Like we're now at the 2014 era of AI. And, I know of probably about 10 folks in the AmLaw space that have, AI in their title. And I think that 10 years from now, it's going to be that same. That's 1,800% growth. So 18x in 10 years. But what triggered the conversation was also AI related. And I thought it was a really good article that you both contributed to and shared your perspective on. And like I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast here, it's a conversation that I have very often. So a little bit of quick background on me. So I started a company called AcroWire in 2008, and we were time and materials consultants. So, we did essentially work for hire where the client retained all the IP and we came in with our consulting expertise, mostly technology expertise, and would build solutions, and primarily for law firms. And over the years, we got sucked down the intranet rabbit hole very early on. We built the same solution over and over. And then we partnered with a company in the mid 2010s that had a product around that, learned their product, and we weren't big fans of it. So we decided to build a solution. So we started off on the custom dev path and then evolved into a product company. And for a number of reasons. One, candidly, it's a better business model, right? Having some recurring revenue and some predictability. But if I'm being honest, an even bigger driver was the market pulled us in that direction, because we would hand off we'd go through a sometimes year and a half custom dev project. And when it came time to transition that to their internal IT team, a lot of times there was drop balls during handoff, and then sometimes complete failures where they didn't have the skill sets in-house to manage the solution. Maybe they weren't deep on React.js and, or SQL or Azure, whatever technologies. So we've evolved into kind of the product world, and you guys had some really interesting comments that I think we are actually aligned in our philosophies. But what it sounded like, and I'll start with you, Dave, is you talked about pushing your vendors harder and that the vendor development was slow, right. Where it sounds like John Scridato he's now at Latham & Watkins. Yeah, it sounds like his approach, rather than pushing vendors, he's going to kind of build in-house some of these solutions. So Dave, starting with you, kind of what is your just overall general build versus buy philosophy?
Well, different camps, right? So there's software, there's AI, there's data, and these heavily overlap today. And so I would say that our approach previous to our innovation investments recently was to develop where we felt we could do a better job. And so that led to too many silos and abandoned projects, which is very typical. And so what we did is we really refreshed that to say we use the word platform a lot, both as a firm with 32 offices around the world, consider ourselves a platform. But then from the software standpoint, it's very important that we create the blueprint for that platform, because we don't want our lawyers to care where their data is or to learn 19 different systems. And I know a lot of times firms still hold the systems and the data within a department and then say, hey, if you want to know our expertise, you call marketing, right? And we knew we didn't want to be in that situation. And so that led us to have some really long-term relationships with some of the vendors in the market. For example, we worked with Latera a lot in the marketing space in that area, and we work with other vendors in other areas. So we wanted to make sure that instead of building 30 solutions, we would say, where can we get the closest to a unified platform, at least in one business area? And so we have fewer systems. And then, but I would say today we do more custom development than when I started here, not because we are, but for different reasons. So now what we're doing is we custom develop to close the gaps. Where do we see that there isn't something that strategically fills a gap in a platform or does something. I mean, so like resource management was one that we've published about as well, where we said there just isn't at the time, the right solution that either provides the capabilities or glues our experience together enough. And so that's a very big part of it for us, is we want to think of it from the lawyers, from the client standpoint, as saying, how do we create as much of a unified experience for them as possible? And so that's the start. So we do a ton of custom development, but we also have a ton of vendors that we work with. But those that we work with, we're constantly, and Rich is a big part of this, constantly at the R&D table, pushing them to get further down the road where they are. And so I don't think there's any of the big vendors we work with where we aren't the front of their roadmap and anxiously ahead of the roadmap, unfortunately. But so really it's a both. But so the hard part is bringing that together, and so that's the key. Is we work across our departments, marketing and finance and risk and IT. This is all a unified blueprint to say our systems need to work together, and that we plan over. We have a 3 and 4 year planning period that we make sure we're putting things in, and then we are making sure that we are tying those together. So our conflicts are the way we accept things into our CRM. So we're tracking our upcoming work has to correlate to the new matter intake that we have. And so you could say, well, those are 2 or 3 different departments. And it's like, well, it's the same flow. Your prospective work needs to turn into your active work, and you need to correlate those together. So it's really, I would say we start with the blueprint of what business problem are we trying to overcome, and how do we look at maybe a big 4 as an example rather than most law firms. And then it's sitting back and saying what products fill those needs. And so it's, I've been getting back to the AI point, is we would look at it in the same way. We have some really key vendor relationships, and we are, I would say in every case, Rich, you can back me up on this, is, we are either the first to be there doing their alpha testing with them on something new we've pushed them to develop, and or we are applying their capabilities in a broader way than they initially intended. And that is most of what we do now. And then, Rich has been here just a short time. And so that will add our capabilities to do more things ourselves. Again, where we'll push vendors where we can, and then we'll do more wherever it makes sense on top of that.
But I really love that. I love that place. And that's something that I've done over my career. Is one is, where do we want to make the investment in energy and focus to get close to the vendor, to take a chance and be upfront and work with them to shape that offering in the way that we think meets, sort of our needs and in line with where we think the industry should be going. So, over my career, there have been times where people have said, oh, well, will you work with this on, X, Y, or Z? And I'm like, that's not important enough to us now for us, because it takes time and energy and effort, and the enterprises that follow, the law firms that follow, get the benefit of that. Like, I'll sit there and look at version 2 or 3 of a major offering and go, you're welcome, because the pain from version 1 to 2 was because of us. So it's, but I really like that, because it gives us a chance to shape something, to get a product that's going to be supported from people who are in the business of making product. And so when it matters, I love that.
And one thing that probably gives some flavor to that balance is, you mentioned John Scridato, who is great. He's what I've seen so far is he's developing practice specific solutions and so in those areas we'll probably be very custom as well. Our first priority for us at this point is a little more about business transformation. We want to be a really well-run company disguised as a law firm, basically. And so that's a different set of initiatives. It's a broad enterprise platform play. And then on in addition to that, we'll do practice specific solutions. And so that drives our balance of where do vendors help us and where is something so unique there isn't any, there's nothing to even consider in that way. And we're doing a lot of business initiatives at this point, and that drives our portfolio.
Yeah, I have many years, 30 years in technical space. I used to be with Microsoft in the late 90s, early 2000s. Was a consultant, freelance before that, and have been doing it professionally really since 2000 when I got my first side gig while at Microsoft. And I can say from my experience, the balance that you're describing is really the best place to be in terms of leverage the off-the-shelf solutions for the known problems where there are vetted, viable solutions, and take those engineering resources and point them towards problems where off-the-shelf solutions don't exist. And in scenarios where you can partner with a vendor, like, so for example, InfoDash, our first kind of big customer was Ogletree Deacons, and they kind of did what you were describing, Rich. Like, they spent a lot of time with us, and everybody else can thank them for a lot of the innovations. Now we're big enough now where we got a whole, dozens of AmLaw firms that are contributing. But in the beginning, it was a lot theirs. But it created a huge sense of loyalty for us. So yeah, you're making an investment, but hopefully the vendor that you're partnering with recognizes your contribution. And like when OD says jump, we say how high.
Absolutely. I've had those scenarios where we took a chance on a vendor. This is, sort of pre-Reed Smith days. I've only, been there a few months, but, we would take a chance. Maybe it was a new offering. Maybe it was a whole new line of business, and we do so in a really selective way. And as, weeks turned into months and so on, when we would call, we would get that answer. When we needed those resources, we would get them. And, and at times people would say, well, we're not getting that. And sometimes I'd say back to the vendor, hey, I hope you're watching your pipeline, because you're going to have a lot of disappointed customers because you've got more demand than you can service. But that's not my problem, because you answer the call, and we've earned that. And so you're right. It goes both ways. And I'm eternally grateful for when, because it does. It is a partnership.
Yeah. And it's, I think it's a partnership where everyone benefits, the vendor, the firm, and ultimately the industry, right? Because, partnering in that way, the biggest challenge. So the build versus buy conversations that we have now are based around intranets, because that's what we do. And, the way I try to explain kind of the flip side or the con side to a firm is you have to be good. And this is true whether you're building something that's already, there are off-the-shelf solutions, or you're doing it in cutting edge ways like you guys are. You have to be good at engineering. You have to be good at SDLC. You have to be good at product management. You have to be good at support. You have to be good at training. There's a multitude of disciplines that you have to have expertise in that, let's be honest, how many law firms have depth across all those disciplines? Only the biggest ones, it's even possible, right? You guys are a sufficient size where you can make that happen. But if you are, let's say, 500 attorneys or less, there's zero chance. There's zero chance. If you're looking at the standard multiplier, it's about 2 headcount for each attorney. That means you got 1,000 people. You probably need 20 just to build and support a new enterprise initiative, technology platform. So I just don't think it's realistic for kind of mid and small size firms. And I think that doing it selectively, like you guys are, in very focused niche ways, makes the most sense. So we're 2020 on that. What about how does AI influence this? Like the nature of the article was, that right now there's, and I think this was John's quote, is he was genuinely disappointed by the tools that are in the marketplace today, both in terms of cost and capability and error rates. And we're seeing a lot of that now. I was on a podcast with Vishal, I think last week, from Alston and Bird, and we were talking about all the things that are happening right now in the AI space, like, the Gartner hype curve, where I feel like we're in the trough of disillusionment now. We got things like the Stanford study that pointed out some of the hallucinations in the TR world. We've got all sorts of questions happening with Harvey's direction. You've got there's a survey that came out about I can't remember who conducted it, but about attorney enthusiasm on. It's just like, I definitely feel like we're nearing the bottom, and then we're going to kind of plateau out and things will stabilize. Right. But how has that affected, Dave, AI? How has that affected your whole mantra around the build versus buy?
Well, it's funny because every company slaps AI on their solution now. And so I've had to help Rich because everybody comes to him, no matter what the problem is they're trying to solve. It's got AI. So say, hey, Rich, help me evaluate this. And so we've had to make sure that, well, Rich should be a piece of that, right? But let's make sure we're analyzing the area. So, I mean, to us, it's really the same answer. Is we have to start with what's the problem we're trying to solve, and then be able to look at, and we will try to find someone who can help us solve it. And what we're finding in the language model space is that there are some really good vendors out there, companies out there, that have a good tool set that are being applied in narrow ways, or they're struggling because law firms are generally working a department at a time. So they'll only get to talk to finance or marketing, right? And so we're able to come to the table and represent all the departments. And so we can go to them and we say, oh, your model is actually really good. We want to apply it in some deeper ways, or at least some broader ways. And so they both appreciate that, but I think they also struggle because they are also trying to, they're often really good technical shops that are struggling to figure out, how do I solve law firms' problems? And so we have to be not only technical enough to dig into, is this the winner to partner with, but also really good at understanding the problem we've got to solve and what it takes. And so it's a long way of saying really the same process. And AI and data and software are all the same conversation to us, because we're constantly moving amongst those. And we didn't put generative AI in Rich's title because we know that, data science. I mean, we're hiring a data scientist right now, because that's one of the areas where we want to be better and better and better about learning the patterns of our data and the industry's data. And so that is, most people thinking of language models. Great. We want to blend that with the structured data analysis and the pattern analysis and bring those two together. So it's same thing. Start with the problem. Do we have to, can anybody help us with this, move faster? And if not, we've just doubled the size of half of our team so that we can build where we need to.
Rich, people like you don't grow on trees. I think that is the key difference in the whole AI space versus, I mean, people with true expertise like yourself aren't easy to find. So, staffing and retaining those resources long term, what's the plan, Rich? It sounds like you're neck deep in that world. How does a law firm go about doing that, over time?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I'm 3 months into trying to do this at a law firm over time in a universe where we're kind of out in front. I think that the approach that we want to take to hiring is, we'll sit down and say, what are the skills we really need? What are we trying to achieve? And actually right now, because the universe is moving so rapidly, things are evolving, and there are so many directions, and we're being, inundated with possibilities. We want people who can help us think through what it means to try to enhance the tools and our systems kind of across the firm in a way that's useful for the lawyers in the firm. So, we have to look at everything sort of through that lens. And then as we're looking at the candidates, it's okay. Do we have people who maybe they haven't solved these problems in law firms, but are the professional services firms a good enough proxy? And I believe they are. So, we have this problem where everyone wants to apply or put AI in they jump at those offerings. And just like with the vendors trying to throw things at us, and the lawyers and our user community having at times, I think, unrealistic expectations. So you're virtually guaranteed you're going to be disappointed with things changing by the minute. And so the challenge is to manage all of that, figure out how to apply our focus, how to hire the people with the right skill sets, almost without regard to what the titles are. Look for those skill sets. And at the same time, focus on developing a good intuition and realistic expectations in our users, because sometimes someone may be upset about how a tool fared because the tool wasn't built to do that. So maybe you weren't using the thing in the way it was intended to be used. And then it's a question of, well, do we need to change the tool, or do we need to change your expectations or find a different tool? As opposed to, oh my God, this stuff was hyped, it's horrible, and now we're, kind of in the trough. So this is the landscape that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, they don't call it the peak of inflated expectations for nothing on the hype curve. That's exactly the dynamic I think you're describing. So how does, let's speak candidly here for a minute. Law firms don't have the as an industry, they don't have a reputation of being in front on technology investment. In fact, I would venture to say they're bottom quartile. So how do law firms, you're talking about the most in-demand skill sets in technology right now, like bar none, by several orders of magnitude, I would think. So Dave, how do you convince, are you just dealing with primarily recruiting within the industry, or how do you go outside the industry and say, hey, no, we're really doing something, we're investing, we're tech forward here? How does that work?
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to share with other firms that may be in or beginning this process that we're getting hundreds of applicants for each of our cool roles. And so, certainly we whittle it down pretty quickly, but there's certainly a lot of people that are interested. And that's a great start. So most of our applicants are outside the legal industry. Now, and we've hired a bit of both. Like we just hired a director of change leadership role that I've mentioned previously, that it came from outside the industry. There wasn't anybody in legal that has studied, mastered change well enough that we felt they were the right fit. There were some really good ones, but we ended up hiring someone from outside the industry because they handle change at a much faster pace. Mergers and acquisitions happening at a regular pace, and we've got to integrate and move on. And so we're not a machine by any sense, but we really wanted some expertise. And then I would say that the big four have been great for us. Like Madeline, who leads our innovation lab, she was a leader in the KPMG lab before she came to us. We hired a head of insights from Bloomberg, example. So you've got kind of law firm and then law firm adjacent, or professional services, and so that's been a rich field. And then a few from outside the industry, and we've been hiring some more of a data quality team and focusing more on insights rather than dashboards. And so there's a ton of expertise outside the legal market. So our philosophy was we wanted to build up a core team of people that know either legal or professional services deeply And then the farther we get away from the core, I mean, we're not huge, so we're not, never too far, but then we can apply people who have the right skill set but don't know the market as well, because they've got the legal guidance. And so no, it's been great. I mean, our team is super impressive. Rich is an example of that. But to your point, I don't know how a 500 lawyer firm does compete in this space. And so we've got to have the scale to make it make sense. But I'll tell you I talked to a lot of my peers at equally big firms, and they cannot make these kind of hires, because I think the leap that I want them to make with us is, don't just say it's an expense, I need to have more. We're trying to grow up the business and say, I'm going to be a mature, well-run business and redesign our practices. I mean, we're doing both equally. The lab is focused on first principles, client-centered design of our practices. How do we think about the outcomes? And we have an equally big focus on the business. And so once you do that and you start to do the math and you say, oh, if I'm able to grow our pipeline 0.5% or reduce our write-offs, we have some great AI analysis around pricing and write-offs in these areas. You start to do the math in all these ways that you can tune the firm, the numbers are huge. And we do that from the client's perspective, right? How do we give confidence in pricing? How do we, in some cases, when we talk a lot about cycle time, how do we get projects done faster? Because for a lot of work, that's what our clients want. And so, your question's about staffing, but the way we're able to keep giving our leadership confidence that we should be hiring these people is that we're doing the math to say, as we solve these business problems, our ROI is so significant. They become hungry to hire, to scale the team. They've been happy to grow our lab and beginning to grow Rich's area. And so I think that's actually so I guess the bottom line is, it's easier to attract them than it is to get the firm commitment to approve them in the first place. And if you can tell the story of the outcomes that can be created, it's a very convincing investment. So that's what I would encourage people to do.
And Ted, on the recruiting side, I mean, the reason that I was attracted to Reed Smith was because of that environment. And it is atypical. And so, it's not, we just want to create a title and hire, or we're going to say, here's our big AI hire, grab one person, drop them into a desert. I mean, Dave and I have been talking about the team, the organization, and the incredible position that I'm in is I'm coming into an organization that has been built with all of this in mind, and I'm just the next piece. And so when you can, it was that opportunity, it's that team, it's that environment, and it's atypical. So, and we can project that. And so when we go out to hire, I mean, I can talk about this organization and what we're doing and why it matters and how there is institutional support right up the top. And that, that makes it, I think, compelling. As opposed to, there's a department that's kind of running this project and it's off in an island and, there's no support for it. I don't want to go into that environment.
Yeah. Well, and you guys are atypical, and I'm not just blowing smoke here because you happen to be on the podcast. So over the 16 years I've been selling into the space, we've done business with 110 AM law firms. So I've had a sneak peek into a lot of different areas. And one big shortcoming I've seen in the legal industry is the power structure, the organizational influence mechanisms in play. So for example, I saw a post recently about, I think it was Catherine Bamford posted about how she had heard that innovation teams are now looked at as sometimes a bottleneck. And the first thing that popped into my head was, are they a bottleneck, or are they just applying discipline around the things that they work on? Instead of being in triage mode where influential partner comes in the office and says, I want this. And then you have to go deploy resources on that. Yeah, that doesn't work. That's not how you run a business. But that's how law firms work. And that's how they've worked for years. And, you have to really have a committed leadership team. I saw another, it was a short clip. Ben Whitewick has a new podcast, and he had a guest on, and they were talking about a CRO. Why don't law firms have a CRO? And he used the example of, hey, you have a client that's got a high revenue customer, maybe let's say it's Coca-Cola, but terrible margins. And you know what? That's excluding us from doing business with Pepsi. Let's fire Coke and go talk. That would be the CRO. Could you imagine a influential partner? Hey, go fire that big revenue.
Right.
Good luck with that, right?
Right.
But the reality is, running a business, those conversations need to happen, but they're very difficult to have happen in law firms. So you guys really are doing things different because you're going to have to say no. And Dave, how's that going to work? Because if you want to stay focused and really run this like a disciplined organization, sometimes you got to say no. Or not yet.
That's a conversation we have all the time. The way we're doing a dozen things, but a big part of that is we are growing up the role of the practice leader, because often practice leaders have been the person who's in charge of, I don't want to say herding the cats because it's just not expressive enough, but they sometimes are the last person to hear about issues. They often don't know the pipeline of the group, and it's extremely ad hoc. They're talking to people, they're visiting, they're going to an office. And so the information they get is in 1,000 pieces. And by, this is something I've painfully heard from group leaders, in our firm and others, where, for example, they may hear about a write-off request. It's their job to approve a write-off request, but they didn't hear about it when we were pitching the matter, when we priced the matter, when we staffed the matter, when we went over the first part of the budget, and so there were 9 places where they could have been warned that something, I should help at that point. And so that's that practice leader to us. Again, this is, cutting edge in a law firm, but this is like normal business in a corporation, is they should have all the numbers. And so we talk a lot about the pipeline. We're using data science to analyze client health factors, client growth factors, to be predictive about looking at write-off risks so that we know it when we're pitching, or at least we're in the middle of the active project. And so, dozen other areas. But if you look at that as an example, the industry leader, the practice leader, of course, we call the senior management team, they need to have the data, not more dashboards. We have 1 million dashboards, and some of them are useful, some of them are seen, but we want to go above that to say, what are we just call them insights. What are the 5 things you need to know today that you weren't even thinking to ask about, but we've realized there's something, either an opportunity, go sit with this client, something changed in their world. We love to be the risk radar for a client, like something's happened to your client, you should go talk to them right away. Or over here, there's a matter in the pipeline that's not really priced the way we think it should be. You should go talk to them before that goes out the door. And so those are things that maybe were somewhere on a report if you were thinking of those problems, but our job is to seek those patterns and bring them up and almost gamify it in a way where the practice leader wants to go there and says, I'm really hungry for these insights because they help me tune my practice and do a better job. And that's a level of business management that lawyers aren't usually trained to do. And it's not a level of data insights they usually have at their fingertips, or that they have the time to go figure out. And so it's, business leadership is a huge part of growing up in these areas.
Yeah. I mean, you've heard, I'm sure, law is it's a profession. It's not a business, or forget the exact verbiage there, but the message is we're different. I want to talk a little bit about, we're going to talk about scaling, but I'd love to talk about Harvey a little, because I know how hungry the market is for information around Harvey. I think they've been deprived and have expressed, the market has expressed their discontent for the lack of information available. So, and I think it sounds like Harvey's gotten the message, right? They're doing more now, which I think is great. Yeah.
Yes.
But I know you guys were, are, I don't know what the term is, if you're pilot or you're just customers, but your customer. Okay. So how, and I don't know who's best to talk to this, but like what use cases are you currently leveraging Harvey for?
Dave, you want me to take this?
Yep. Go ahead, Rich.
Sure. So, I mean, one of the things to understand is, Harvey is it's not one thing, right? It is a collection of capabilities. And so, the one that we're using the most is, they call it Assistant. And it is, what you would, kind of imagine a prompt that you can ground with some information and do, kind of traditional, Q&A summarization analysis. And they've got, their collection of models underneath and some additional infrastructure to do those tasks in, a way that they think are particularly well attuned to the lawyer's needs. So it'll be a range of, summarization tasks and interrogation of document tasks. We're working on one with one of our IP partners, doing a really interesting bit of analysis on some patents. Throw in a patent and do some claim construction and use the LLM to, cough up a definition that would be aligned to what the judge might want to do in claim construction. There's, a translation capability. And again, people like that. It's lightweight. It is, when you need to go in and pull things out and work in different languages, it will do that. Was that unique? No. But is it crafted and tuned in a way? And when I say tuned, I have no clue as to where they are fine-tuning things or not. I just mean the offering is sort of set up for that. One of the things that I really like is they've got these different sort of, workflows. And one is just, we'll analyze a marked up document. We'll take that Latera comparison and we'll make heads or tails out of the ink spilled all over the page. Now, could I do that on my own? Sure. I could write the darn code, write the prompts, but I don't want to, and I shouldn't have to. And to say to a lawyer, here, load this thing in and start giving that summary of what changes happened here, what's really going on, to get you that executive summary that someone should have provided. And there are other skills kind of coming along the way. So it's easy to listen to that list and go, oh, there's, what's the big deal? That's what people do with LLMs. It's like, yeah. But when we make the interface and set things up in a way that's a little more convenient for our lawyers, that's a really good thing. Libraries of sample prompts tuned to the sorts of things that the lawyers want to do. And so, that's where we're seeing it. I find that the interesting thing, and this goes back to one of the points you made before, it's how do we get our lawyers and our team members to use these tools well? How do I get people to develop that intuition so that they don't try and use the tool for something it wasn't built to do, or they, use it in a way that's just destined to fail? And part of that is on the tool builder, and part of that is on us. And so I'm spending an exceptional amount of time. Right now, I feel like I'm spending a third of my time thinking about the people we're going to hire, a third of my time thinking about how to shape what Harvey and others, and all the other people right up and down the line, what's going to be in their products. And a third of the time thinking about how we're going to teach our people to use this stuff well. And then there's another third of my time, which gets to 4/3, and that's why I don't get to answer the phone.
That's why you need a vacation.
That's right.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I want to ask one final question. I'll ask you, Dave, since Rich just spoke. Do we need legal specific AI tools, or are the general purpose tools with the proper governance mechanisms in place sufficient? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Rich wants to answer, so I'm going to try to see if I can do him justice.
Yeah, right, I do.
You're killing him by not asking him. I'll answer briefly and leave enough time for Rich to give his own view. I mean, to me, we are, in some cases, piloting products almost side by side, or at least analyzing them side by side, that are focused on solving the same problem. And one of them is legal specific, one of them is not. And so I would say, me personally, that's not as deep and as rich in these areas, that I am waiting to see if it is necessary to have something, because legal specific to me also means it's aware of Sally and how to categorize our tasks. And it was trained on legal language more than a model that wasn't, et cetera. And so I personally am not sure of the results. Rich will tell you the answer in a second, but we're open to either case. And most vendors are using multiple models themselves and really applying whatever one makes sense for the use case. And so it's almost irrelevant in some cases because they are themselves pulling in multiple models. But as many people recognize, the quality of the data to us is more important, is where we spend a lot more of our focus, is what are we giving it and what are we expecting out of it. But Rich, why don't you pipe up?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think we need legal specific LLMs. I don't think we need legal specific frontier models. I do think we need all the other things that go around those models to turn them into useful offerings for lawyers to work the way lawyers want to work. I can summarize a document using ChatGPT, and I can do it really well, or Claude, or whatever one you want. But I can also give a lawyer a product that has built-in drop-downs to let them say, I want a decent summarization of a brief or a merger agreement, and not expect them to figure out how to conjure that out of the LLM. Do we need Lexis and Thomson Reuters for legal research? Why aren't we just using Google for it all?
I don't think you mean that quite so literally. So.
Right. I get it. It's a rhetorical question. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. We didn't get through, and I knew we wouldn't. We didn't get through all the topics we wanted to touch on, but maybe we can have you guys back down the road, because I would love to stay in touch. Again, I really do feel like you guys are doing some things that are a little different than what I typically see, and I'd love to keep my finger on the pulse of what you're doing over there. So if you're open to it, I'd love to have you back on down the road sometime.
It sounds great. We are learning vast amounts every day ourselves, so we'll certainly be smarter down the road.
Awesome. Well, good stuff. I appreciate the time this afternoon. And are you guys going to Nashville? You going to be in ILTACON this year?
Rich is.
Okay. Good stuff. We'll have to grab a beverage and kick the tires a little bit. Yeah. All right. Thanks for coming on. We'll chat again soon.
Thanks, Dave. Good to see you.
All right. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by InfoDash.